Okay, this video today is going to be going over some of the sort of visual checks that you'll have to do on the Metalwork lathes. Just before you start doing any kind of cutting processes, it's always best to do these vital checks so that you're doing the correct job for the correct procedure. Okay, first check I would do is quite an obvious one, but make sure that your piece of material that you're working from is held secure in the 3-jaw chuck using the chuck key. So make sure that's in there and nice and secure. Chuck key will also need to be removed before using the machine. Place that back down into the storage box on top. You will also have your guard that will come down for the chuck, and you'll also have your splash guard that will also come down as well. Okay. Okay, second thing to check would be that you've got in the correct gears, correct speed, sorry, for the cutting procedure that you're working from. Like I said in a previous Metalwork video, most of your cutting procedures that you'll do in the Metalwork lathe will be in what is our low speed of 1050 reps, which is in positions D and C. So as long as the two handles are pointing inwards, you're in the correct procedure. If you're doing the knurling procedure, which is a process I'll show you in another video, it would be in position EA, and all you would do with that is you would take the handles out to the sides, and it was in position E and position A, ready for that knurling process. Next thing you probably check in here as well is that you've got the coolant tab button switched on here. So it's got a 0 for off and 1 for on. Make sure that it's in the on position. Next thing would be to double check that you have the correct tool for whatever cutting procedure you're working from. So what we've got here on the the tool post is we've got our normal facing off tool, we've got our chamfer tool, which is this one here, and then this one is our parting tool, and we also have our knurling tool as well. So depending which cutting process you're working from, it would depend on which tool you plan to use. If you are planning to use the parting tool, then you need to make sure that you put in this pin here. So this is a little kind of locking pin, all right, goes up and down, and you can just about see it if I turn around this way slightly with the camera. There's a hole just in here where my finger is there, where that pin fits into, okay? So all you would do is turn this tool post around so it's nice and straight, and then push that pin down into the hole. So even with this bolt, central locking bolt in the middle here, loose, this is not going anywhere because the pin is in securely. All right, so that's a secondary lock on the tool post, because the parting tool as well as the knurling tool puts a lot of forward force onto the bar when you're using it. So the secondary lock is something we need to make sure we put in place when we're using these two tools. The other two tools that we've got there, you don't necessarily need to put that pin in. Another check that you should be doing on the lathe before using it is check the cutting tip that you're working from to make sure there's no damage or anything else that could cause you problems. So you can see, hopefully in the video here, that my leading cutting tip edge, this corner here, as you can see, is actually got a big chunk missing out of it. All right, so somebody's rattled this against their bar or the metal when they're cutting, and it's snapped that corner off. Okay, the beauty of using these type of cutting tips is we've got 3 cutting tips we could actually use. All we would need to do is rotate it around. A second problem with this cutting tip is it's actually a little bit loose. You can see here, if I give it a wee wobble. All right, so the cutting tip is actually a little bit loose. The cutting tips do come loose after using quite a lot, just because the vibrations on the machine slacken the torque screw that's here. All right, so using the torque screw, I can simply tighten this up, okay? But before I tighten that up, I want to rotate the cutting tip around. So I can lift this up, and then I can just rotate it around to a cutting tip edge that has a slightly better corner on it, okay? And then with the torque screw, just make sure that's nice and tight, and you can see there, if I try and move it about, it's not going anywhere. Okay, so it's good to make sure that if you are cutting, you've got a nice clean corner on your cutting tip there. That way you get a clean cut on your material. Something else that you might need to work on is the angle. All right, depending if you're doing a taper turn, that you might need to set the compound slide. So this is the compound slide here. If I can tilt the camera back a little bit, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Alright, the compound slide, which has the tool post sitting on top of it. Okay, so you might need to, at some point, have to change the angle of it, depending on what kind of procedure you're working from. So to do that, it's simply, you've got the spanner, alright, which is also found inside the box. You would loosen these two bolts here, alright, and there's two more at the back. Loosen those 4 bolts, and then there's a little upward, a wee line just going up here vertical, which is currently set to into the 0 position, and then you would rotate this around to your 10 degrees, 20 degrees, whatever it is you're going to set it to. Okay, once you set the angle, having that vertical line lined up where your angle is going to be, you would just use the spanner again to tighten up those 4 bolts. Okay, and something else to check before using is you have the coolant nozzle here. Alright, we've already showed you in the previous part of the video how to turn it on with the tap button down below, but you've got a little yellow handle here that you would just open up, and you want to double check that there is definitely coolant coming out of the nozzle there, and you would bring that across to sit on top of your cutting tip as you're doing any cutting procedure. That way it helps keep your tool cool, and it keeps your metal from overheating as well. If the metal heats up, it becomes harder to kind of cut and shape. Okay, last thing to check on the machine before using it is to make sure that the cutting tool that you're working from is centered. And what I mean by that is the cutting tip here should be in line with the center of the bar that you're working from. Okay, easiest way to check that it is centered quite quickly is to get a steel rule and just place that in between the cutting tool that you're working from and the bar. And if you squish it together, the steel rule should be going perfectly straight up and down. Okay, and as you can see there on this example, it's actually leaning off to the left. Okay, so it's leaning back towards the user. What that means is, and what that indicates is that the tool here is actually set down too low. Alright, so it needs to come back up a wee bit. Okay, if the steel rule was leaning the other way and it was leaning out towards in our case, the window here, if it was leaning that way, it means the tool is too high. Alright, so you can adjust the tool height by using these bits here. Okay, to do that, all you do is there's a couple of tools that you get from the box. So we've got a couple of different tools that we can use here. First one is we want to use this little tool here, and what that's going to do is it's just going to unloosen the tool holder itself from the tool post. So that's taken, you can actually remove the tool, the whole thing entirely. And then we've got another sort of tool here that allows us to adjust the height. So you can turn it on here, and then we can just turn it down to lift the tool up. So if you twist it one way, the tool will lift up. If you turn it the other way, it's obviously going to put the tool down. Okay, so you want to do a little bit at a time, and then just check the tool again against the steel rule so we can come back and check. It's better, but it's still leaning slightly back towards the user. So I might need to do a little bit more. So again, loosen the tool holder from the tool post. And then you can actually do this here by twisting it up the other way. A little bit more. And tighten it back up again. And that should hopefully be, yeah, that's more or less pretty good. It's going nice and straight there, nice and vertical. Okay, so that means now that we have our tools set to the correct height. Another way in which you can check the tool height is by using the revolving center. You can put the revolving center into the tailstock, and essentially the whole point of this is to match the height of the tip of the tool with the center point of the revolving center. So it's another way in which you could do this, is bringing the 2 points together to get that to match up. Okay, personally I find that more of a long-winded way to try and get it centered. You're actually quicker, personally, from my way of working with it, is just to get the steel rule like I showed you previously and get it set up using that method. Okay, so that there is essentially the checks that you would have to do on the Metalwork lathe, or at least most of them. Okay, although it looks like quite a lot in the video, it was a 6-minute video, but when you come to use the lathes quite regularly, these checks will become kind of second nature to you. All right, and the whole purpose of making sure you do these checks every time you go onto the lathe is to make sure that you get the correct cutting tool that you're using, you've got the correct speed to work with, okay, and you've got the tool set to the correct height, and all these checks will allow you to get more accurate cutting on the machine, but also the quality of your work will hopefully be improved. Okay, thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.